You homewrecker! You shameless, worthless woman! You think you deserve a PhD? The words sliced through the ceremonial hall like a blade. I stood frozen on the stage, my hand still extended toward the university president, the diploma halfway between us. The applause that had been swelling for Dr. Katie Morrison, for me, died instantly. My first thought wasn't even coherent. It was just static, white noise filling my ears as every head in that auditorium swiveled toward the source of the outburst. A woman stood in the back row, her arm raised, finger pointed directly at me. Her face was flushed crimson, her hair disheveled, and even from this distance, I could see tears streaming down her cheeks. She ruined my marriage. Ask David. The woman's voice cracked on my husband's name. Then she turned and fled, the heavy door slamming behind her. I couldn't move. My hands trembled so badly the diploma shook. Someone whispered loudly enough for me to hear. Did she say David Morrison? Cell phones emerged from pockets, some already recording. The president cleared his throat, attempting to salvage the moment with a strained smile. But I wasn't looking at him. My eyes had found the section where my family sat. My parents, David, his parents, and his sister Sandra. And there, in that moment of complete humiliation, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Sandra was smiling, not a sympathetic grimace or shocked expression. A genuine, triumphant smile that said she'd been waiting for this moment. The question that would haunt me for weeks formed instantly. When did the worst moment of my life actually begin? I grew up the eldest daughter in a solidly middle-class Dutch-American family in suburban Texas. My parents, both from hardworking immigrant stock, had instilled in me the value of education above almost everything else. While other kids spent summers at camps, I spent mine with books, always chasing the next degree. David Morrison had been part of my life since before I could remember. Our families were distantly related, something about great-grandparents who'd immigrated together from the Netherlands. But we'd grown up like siblings. Every summer barbecue, every holiday gathering, there was David. We built forts together, learned to ride bikes together, shared secrets under the stars. When we reconnected at an academic conference in my mid-20s, something shifted. The boy I'd known became a man I could love. We dated long distance while I pursued my PhD in psychology. When we married, it felt natural, like we'd been heading toward this moment since childhood. Money was tight for two graduate students, so when David's parents offered us their Texas home, we accepted gratefully. The Morrison house was everything you'd picture. A sprawling ranch-style home with manicured lawn, two-car garage, back patio perfect for weekend barbecues. His parents, George and Marianne Morrison, were pillars of the community, church every Sunday, neighborhood watch captains. And then there was Sandra. Sandra Morrison was 30, 3 years younger than David and me, and she'd never left home. She worked as an office manager, but spent most energy managing the household and everyone in it. At first, I'd thought we could be friends, but within weeks I realized Sandra saw me as competition. She had a gift for making me feel small. When I'd spend hours working on my dissertation, she'd comment at dinner, "Must be nice to sit around reading all day while some of us actually work." When I'd try helping with cooking, she'd hover, "That's not how Mom taught us. I guess you didn't grow up doing things the Texas way." Worst was how she'd twist things before Marianne. If I spent an evening at a study group, Sandra would mention how I'd missed family dinner. Again. If David and I stayed up late talking, she'd sigh at breakfast about thin walls. Gradually, subtly, she painted me as an outsider who didn't appreciate Morrison family hospitality. Marianne, who'd welcomed me warmly at first, began to cool. Once, after Sandra made a particularly pointed comment about my research being impractical theory, Marianne pulled me aside. "Katie, dear, You're in our home now. Remember, this is our family space, and we have our ways. I was a guest in my own marriage, and I was too focused on finishing my PhD to realize the real war being waged had nothing to do with dishes or dinner times. It was about destroying me entirely. The graduation ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of. The University of Texas at Austin's main auditorium was packed with graduate students, faculty, distinguished alumni, and local business leaders. The PhD hooding ceremony was the crown jewel of graduation week. I'd been so excited I'd invited everyone. My parents drove in from Houston, tears already in their eyes. David and his parents came, and when I'd extended the invitation to Sandra, she'd seemed genuinely enthusiastic. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Katie," she'd said, smiling wide. "It's not every day someone in the family becomes a doctor." I'd taken it as an olive branch. Finally, I'd thought, maybe she's proud of me. Before the ceremony, we'd gathered outside. My mother fussed with my doctoral robes, adjusting the hood. My father took hundreds of photos. George Morrison gave me a firm handshake and, "Well done, Katie," while Marianne offered a reserved smile. David squeezed my hand, his excitement evident. Sandra had been almost giddy. "Dr. Morrison," she'd said, testing the title. "How does it feel, Katie? Nervous?" There'd been something in her tone I couldn't place, something between genuine interest and mockery, but I'd brushed it off. Today was my day. Nothing could ruin it. The ceremony proceeded beautifully. Speeches from the dean, recognition of distinguished dissertations, then individual hooding of each PhD candidate. When they called my name, Katie Elizabeth Morrison, Doctor of Philosophy and Psychology, I felt my heart soar. The applause was warm, genuine. I climbed the steps to the stage, legs shaking with adrenaline and pride. That's when the voice rang out. "You husband-stealing piece of trash. You shameless, worthless woman. You think you deserve a PhD?" The words were so unexpected, so violent, that at first my brain couldn't process them. I turned and saw her, a woman about my age, standing in the back section, her whole body trembling with rage. Her hair looked like she'd been running hands through it, mascara smudged from crying. But her voice was clear, amplified by fury. "She ruined my marriage. Ask David." The auditorium erupted in whispers. I heard fragments. "Who is that? What did she say? Is she talking about David Morrison?" Several people had phones out, recording. I could see red recording lights multiplying across the audience. The university president, Dr. Catherine Chen, stepped forward. "Ma'am, this is not appropriate." But the woman, I would learn her name was Fiona, wasn't listening. She stared at me for one more long moment, eyes red and hollow with betrayal, then turned and ran. The door's slam echoed like a gunshot. Dr. Chen turned to me, her expression professional but strained. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, before addressing the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for this disruption. Let's please continue." But the damage was done. As I stumbled off stage, diploma clutched in numb fingers, I felt every eye on me. Some looked away when I tried meeting their gaze. Others stared openly, expressions ranging from confusion to judgment to something worse. Pity mixed with suspicion. I found my family in the crowd. My parents looked horrified. Marianne had her hand pressed to her chest, face pale. George was frowning deeply, looking between me and David. David himself looked like he'd been struck. His mouth hung open slightly, eyes wide with shock. And Sandra? She'd arranged her face into something resembling concern, but her eyes danced with barely contained glee. She looked like someone watching the finale of her favorite show, the moment where everything comes together exactly as planned. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. I returned to my seat, but couldn't focus. Names of other graduates washed over me meaninglessly. My friend Jennifer leaned over and whispered, "Katie, are you okay? Who was that woman?" I couldn't answer. My throat felt completely closed. When we finally filed out for reception and photos, I felt like I was walking through water. Everything moved slowly, sounds muffled. But I was acutely aware of how people were treating me now. Some graduates actively avoided looking at me. Others glanced my way, then immediately turned to whisper to companions. I saw Dr. Hernandez, my dissertation advisor, making his way toward me. His expression was carefully neutral, but I knew him well enough to see the concern beneath. "Katie," he said quietly, drawing me aside. "Do you want to tell me what that was about?" "I don't know," I said, voice shaking. "I don't know who that woman was. I've never, I would never." "I believe you," he said, then hesitated. "But Katie, you need to understand something. This program, this university, we have a reputation to uphold. An accusation like that, made publicly." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. My academic reputation, the thing I'd spent nearly a decade building, had just been set on fire before hundreds of witnesses. Our families had gathered in a corner. My mother rushed to me immediately, wrapping me in a hug. "Honey, what on earth?" "I don't know, Mom." I was barely holding it together. My father, usually so calm, looked furious. "This is insane. Where's David?" David was standing with his parents, and as I approached, I heard Marianne's voice, low but sharp. "David, tell me that wasn't about—" "It's not what you think," David said, but wouldn't meet my eyes. Marianne turned to me, and for the first time since I'd known her, there was no pretense of warmth. "Katie, is there something you need to tell us? Something about you and David's relationship before you married?" "What? No! I don't even know who that woman—" "That was Fiona," David said quietly, and everyone turned to him. "My ex-wife. That was Fiona." The world tilted. "Your ex-wife?" I repeated. "I—" "You said you two divorced because you weren't compatible. You never said anything about this kind of accusation." "I didn't think—" He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't think she'd actually believe—" "Believe what?" My voice was getting louder. People were starting to stare again. "What exactly did she believe, David?" But he didn't answer. He just stood there, looking trapped and miserable, and I realized with cold clarity that he knew something I didn't, something that had led a woman I'd never met to publicly destroy my reputation on what should have been the proudest day of my life. Sandra stood slightly behind her parents, saying nothing. But when I looked at her, she met my gaze steadily, and that small smile was back. That night, I lay in bed in the Morrison house, staring at the ceiling while David slept, or pretended to sleep, beside me. The question circled in my head. Who had told Fiona a story convincing enough that she believed I'd stolen her husband? Who had weaponized a stranger's pain and aimed it directly at me? But I already knew the answer. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The next morning, I couldn't eat. While the Morrison family moved around the kitchen in their usual weekend rhythm, I sat at the table trying to piece together a puzzle I hadn't known existed. "David," I said finally, cutting through the quiet, "I need you to tell me about Fiona. Everything." The kitchen went silent. George lowered his newspaper. Marianne paused, flipping pancakes. Sandra's thumb stopped mid-scroll. David sighed. "Can we talk privately?" "No." I was surprised by how firm my voice sounded. This affected everyone here yesterday. Everyone deserves to know the truth. So he told me. And as he spoke, I began to understand how I'd become the villain in someone else's story. David and I had been inseparable as children. Every summer, every holiday, every family gathering, we'd been together. Our families used to joke, when those two get older, we'll probably be planning a wedding. It had been funny then, innocent. When I'd left Texas for graduate school on the East Coast, David stayed behind, finishing his undergraduate degree. We'd kept in touch through emails and occasional calls, but our lives had diverged. During that time, David met Fiona. She was sweet, David said, not looking at me. Kind. We met at a coffee shop, started dating. After a year, we got married. I remembered that wedding. I'd flown back to Texas for it, stood in the church watching David marry a woman I barely knew. Fiona had been lovely, blonde, petite, with a bright smile and easy laugh. She'd welcomed me warmly when David introduced us. What happened? I asked. You happened, Marianne said quietly, and everyone looked at her. She set down her spatula. Not intentionally, dear, but when you came back to Texas for your PhD program, when you and David reconnected, we were happy to see each other, I protested. We hadn't spent real time together in years. We were catching up, that's all. That's what David told Fiona, George said. His voice was measured. But Katie, you have to understand how it looked. You two would spend hours talking about research, laughing at inside jokes from childhood. You had this intimacy that came from growing up together. Fiona started asking questions. David continued. Why did we hug so long when we greeted each other? Why did we finish each other's sentences? Why did Mom and Dad treat you more like a daughter than a cousin-in-law? Because we're family, I said. But even as I said it, I began to understand. To an outsider, especially an insecure spouse, our relationship might have looked like something more. Sandra didn't help, David said suddenly, and his sister's head snapped up. Excuse me? You were always around Fiona, David said, his voice harder now. Taking her to lunch, going shopping. And you talk about Katie and me, about how we grew up together, how close we'd always been. I was being friendly, Sandra said defensively. Fiona was my sister-in-law. I thought she should know about David's past. You told her we were in love as teenagers, David shot back. You made it sound like Katie and I had some great romance that got interrupted. Sandra's face flushed. I never said that exactly. You didn't have to say it exactly, I said, voice shaking with anger now. You implied it. You planted seeds of doubt, let them grow, and then watched what happened. The kitchen was thick with tension. Marianne looked between her children, confusion and dawning realization crossing her face. But it was clear now. Sandra had taken something innocent, childhood friendship that had matured into familial love, and twisted it into something ugly. She'd whispered poison into Fiona's ear until the poor woman couldn't see anything else. And when Fiona's marriage crumbled under the weight of manufactured suspicion, Sandra had found a weapon. A hurt, angry woman who believed I'd destroyed her life. All Sandra had to do was point her at me and pull the trigger. Over the next week, I couldn't let it go. While David tried to move forward, it's over, let's just forget about it, I found myself obsessing over every detail. This wasn't just about my reputation anymore. This was about understanding how I'd been set up and why. I started with what I knew. Fiona and David had divorced 2 months before my graduation. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Someone had to have orchestrated Fiona's appearance, had to have told her exactly when and where I'd be most vulnerable. Then I remembered something. It had been months ago, back in March. I'd been at a coffee shop near campus, working on dissertation revisions, when I'd spotted Sandra at a corner table. She'd been with another woman, blonde, crying, gesturing emphatically. At the time, I'd only glanced over, not wanting to intrude. But now, with Fiona's tear-stained face burned into my memory, I realized that had been her. Sandra had been meeting with Fiona at that coffee shop. I remembered more details. The way Sandra had leaned in, showing Fiona something on her phone. The way Fiona had covered her mouth with her hand, shaking her head. The way Sandra had reached across the table, squeezing Fiona's hand in what looked like sympathy, but was probably something far more calculated. I'd thought nothing of it then. Not my business, I'd told myself. God, I'd been so stupid. I decided to push David harder. That evening, when we were alone, I confronted him about the divorce details. What exactly did Fiona say when she asked for the divorce? I pressed. David wouldn't meet my eyes. She said she couldn't compete with you, that it was clear I'd never stopped loving you, and she deserved someone who would put her first. And you said? I told her she was wrong. I told her you were family, that there was nothing romantic between us. But she'd already made up her mind. He finally looked at me. She showed me screenshots of text conversations, Katie, messages between her and Sandra. My blood went cold. What did they say? Sandra had been telling her things about how our families always expected us to end up together, about how Mom and Dad were happier when you moved in than they'd been about my marriage to Fiona, about how I'd light up differently when I talked to you. Those are lies. Are they? David asked quietly. Katie, I love you. I always have. And maybe the way I love you does look different. We have history. We have this foundation that goes back to childhood. Don't you dare justify what she did, I said. She didn't just point out observations. She manipulated a vulnerable woman into destroying her own marriage. And then she aimed that woman at me like a weapon. I thought about Sandra's behavior over the past months, the little comments she'd made that I'd brushed off. You and David really are perfect together, aren't you? Family bonds are so strong, sometimes stronger than marriage. She'd been building toward this all along, feeding Fiona's insecurities, nurturing her jealousy, and then, when the divorce was final and Fiona was at her most hurt and angry, Sandra had given her a target. Me, on the most important day of my life. The cruelty of it took my breath away. I needed proof, real evidence, not just suspicions or David's hazy memories. If I was going to expose what Sandra had done, especially to his parents, I had to show it clearly. My first call was to Jennifer from my cohort. Do you remember the woman who shouted at me? Did anyone get a clear video? Half the audience was recording, she said. She warned me it might be painful, but I insisted. She sent 3 videos. I watched them repeatedly, not for Fiona's outburst, but for everything around it. In the 3rd recording, I saw it. Seconds before Fiona stood, someone in front of her turned around, speaking or signaling. The timing was too perfect. Someone had cued her. Next, I reached out to Emily, a mutual friend who stayed in touch with Fiona after the divorce. I approached carefully. Fiona had already suffered enough. I just need to understand, I said, what she believed and why. Katie, she was shattered, Emily said. And when Sandra told her about your graduation, Sandra told her? I cut in. Specifically when and where. Yes. She said Fiona deserved to confront you publicly, the same way you'd publicly stolen her husband. There was the confirmation I needed. Did Sandra show her anything? Messages, pictures? Screenshots, Emily said. Months worth. Photos of you and David laughing at family gatherings, sitting close, hugging. Completely innocent things. but she presented them like proof. My stomach twisted. Normal family moments, reinterpreted as an affair. I asked Emily for Fiona's number. She hesitated, then gave it to me. The call with Fiona was excruciating. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "But you need to understand what it felt like, watching my husband light up when you called, canceling plans for your research, hearing Sandra tell me that everyone always knew you two were meant for each other." "Fiona, I'm not calling for an apology," I said gently. "I think we were both manipulated by the same person." Silence. Then, "Sandra?" "Did she ever explain why she was so invested in convincing you David and I were involved?" "She said David was trapped in a loveless marriage and deserved to be with his soulmate." "Fiona," I said, "David and I are cousins, distant but family. There has never been anything romantic between us." Sandra took normal affection and twisted it. "Why would she do that?" "Because she didn't want me in her family," I said. "And the easiest way to push me out was to turn me into the villain." When we hung up, she agreed to write down everything Sandra had told her, all the manipulations and insinuations. I finally had the last piece of the puzzle. Now it was time to confront the truth and ensure the Morrison family saw Sandra for who she truly was. I spent 2 days preparing a dossier, timeline, screenshots David had saved, statements from Emily and Fiona. When it was done, the pattern was undeniable. Sandra had systematically sabotaged David's marriage and nearly ruined my reputation through calculated emotional manipulation. On Saturday, I asked for a family meeting. George and Marianne looked puzzled, but agreed. Sandra tried to avoid it, but David insisted. We gathered in the Morrison living room, the atmosphere more courtroom than home. "I'm not asking you to believe me," I began, hands trembling. "I'm here to show you facts. After that, you can decide for yourselves." I walked them through the timeline. Sandra befriending Fiona soon after David's wedding, their increasingly frequent meetings, Sandra's comments about how David and I were meant to be, the screenshots Sandra had shown Fiona, taken out of context and presented as proof of an affair. "These messages," I said, passing copies around, "show Sandra telling Fiona that David married the wrong woman, that I was better suited for him, that Fiona should see the truth and set David free." Marianne went pale as she read. George's jaw tightened. "Here's a statement from Emily Rodriguez," I continued. "She confirms Sandra told Fiona about my graduation ceremony and encouraged her to confront me, calling it poetic justice." George turned to Sandra. "Is this true?" Sandra flushed. "You're twisting it. I was trying to help Fiona." "Help her how?" I asked. "By convincing her her husband loved me? By turning her into a weapon you could aim at me?" Something inside Sandra snapped. "You always thought you were so special," she said bitterly. "Everyone loved you. Mom and Dad were so proud of you. David adored your research. You were perfect, and I was just Sandra, the daughter who stayed home." The room fell silent until Marianne whispered, "Sandra, what did you do?" "I told the truth," she shouted. "They were always meant to be together. I helped Fiona see it." "By lying to her," David said, voice flat. "Katie and I were never in love. We're family." Sandra glared at him. "You're lying to yourself." "No," I said, standing. "You're the one lying. To Fiona, to your parents, to yourself. And in the process, you destroyed 2 marriages and nearly my career. All because you couldn't bear that your brother loved me as family." Marianne began to cry. George looked exhausted and defeated. "I think you need to leave for now," George said quietly. until we figure out what comes next. Sandra stared at them, stunned. You're taking her side? We're taking the side of truth, Marianne said gently. And what you did was cruel. Sandra grabbed her purse and stormed out, the slam of the door echoing through the house before silence returned. The fallout spread faster than I expected. Within days, Fiona contacted the university, sending a formal apology to both me and the dean. She admitted she'd been manipulated, that her accusations were baseless, and that her outburst had been driven by lies Sandra fed her. Dr. Hernandez called me into his office. The university can release a statement, he offered, something confirming my record was clean and urging respect for privacy. Will that matter? I asked. People recorded it. It's probably online already. Katie, he said, you can't control what people believe. You can control how you move forward. You earned this degree. He was right, though it didn't make things easier. Over the next weeks, messages poured in. Many were supportive. Others, from people I didn't even know, decided a 30-second clip to find me. Eventually, Fiona and I met for coffee. We were nervous, both of us still raw. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I don't expect you to forgive Sandra either, I replied. We were both victims of the same cruelty. She broke down. Sandra had convinced her that her husband loved me, twisting every harmless interaction into evidence. I'm sorry your marriage ended, I said gently. It wasn't your fault, she whispered, and this time she meant it. But I have to live with what I did to you. I ruined your graduation. You can't undo it, I told her. But you can help people understand the truth. And she did. Fiona wrote a detailed account of Sandra's manipulation and shared it with mutual friends. It didn't travel as fast as the scandal, but it spread far enough that when people mentioned that PhD ceremony incident, they now had context. The Morrison family was left in pieces. Sandra moved out to stay with a friend. Marianne was heartbroken. George withdrew into heavy, wordless disappointment. David and I faced our own reckoning. One night he asked quietly, "Do you want a divorce?" "Do you?" I countered. "I want whatever makes this right. I should have seen what Sandra was doing. I should have protected you both." "Is this fixable?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know I can't stay in this house. I need space. I need to remember who I am." The next week, I moved into a tiny apartment near campus. It was nothing like the Morrison home, but it was mine. David and I agreed to separate, not end our marriage, just pause it. Time to see whether, after everything, our relationship could still survive. 6 months later, I stood before a new audience at a professional conference, presenting the research that had taken me years to complete. When I was introduced, I noticed a few exchanged glances. They'd heard about the incident. But by then, I'd learned I couldn't control what people thought they knew about me. I could only control who I was and how I showed up. The presentation went well. Afterwards, several attendees approached with sincere interest in my work. One professor told me, "I heard what happened at your graduation. In academia, substance outlasts scandal. Your work speaks for itself." David and I were still married, but living apart as we continued therapy, together and individually. We weren't rebuilding trust in each other so much as rebuilding trust in our ability to protect one another. He had failed me once, and I needed to know he wouldn't again. Then a letter arrived from Sandra. I almost didn't open it. She wrote that she wasn't asking for forgiveness, only taking responsibility. She admitted she hadn't been protecting her brother, but acting out of jealousy, of my education, my confidence, the pride people showed me. She'd tried to make me less special, so she could feel special herself. I read the letter twice and tucked it away. I'd decide later whether to respond. Fiona reached out occasionally with short messages. We'd never be friends, but we understood each other now. Two women whose lives had been twisted by someone else's narrative, both determined to reclaim our own. The Morrison family had changed. George and Marianne were gentler, more cautious with their words. Family dinners were rarer, their fragility visible in the careful way everyone behaved. But I had changed too. I knew myself better. One afternoon, Dr. Chen, the university president, emailed asking to feature my research in the alumni magazine. I agreed. When the article came out, it included a photo of me in my doctoral robes with the caption, Dr. Katie Morrison, defining success on her own terms. Online, someone commented, "Wasn't she the one who—" But before I could react, others responded immediately, praising my work, dismissing the gossip, affirming my scholarship. Sitting in my small apartment reading those comments, I felt something I hadn't in months. Pride. Real pride. That day at my graduation, Fiona thought she was revealing a homewrecker. What she exposed instead were the fractures in relationships I'd mistaken for solid. In the end, the worst moment of my life became a strange gift. It taught me this: people will always tell stories about you, but the only one that truly matters is the one you choose to tell yourself. And mine is simple. I am Dr. Katie Morrison. I survived betrayal without losing my integrity. I earned my PhD. I know what family means. I am stronger than anyone's accusations, and more than anyone's revenge story.